The day I came home from my sister's funeral in Portland, I found my husband and my daughter-in-law sitting together at my kitchen table. Not side by side the way people sit when they're waiting to share bad news. Closer than that. My husband's hand was over hers, and neither of them heard me come through the door. I stood in the hallway for a long moment. My coat was still on. My suitcase was still in my hand. 3 days ago, I had buried my only sister, and now I was watching my husband of 31 years hold another woman's hand in the house I had paid for. The woman was Delia, my son Garrett's wife. I set my suitcase down quietly and walked back out the front door. I sat in my car in the driveway for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I had used up every tear I had standing over my sister's grave in the rain. What I felt instead was something much colder, much quieter. A door closing somewhere deep inside me. When I finally walked back in, I made noise this time. I let my keys hit the bowl by the door. I called out that I was home. By the time I reached the kitchen, my husband Richard was standing at the counter pouring 2 glasses of water, and Delia was sitting up straight with her phone in her hand, looking at nothing. Richard said he was sorry about the funeral. He said the drive must have been exhausting. He asked if I was hungry. I said I was tired and went upstairs. That night, I lay in bed listening to Richard move around the house below me. I heard him say goodbye to Delia at the door. I heard her car back out of the driveway. I heard him come up the stairs and stop outside the bedroom. He stood there for a moment, then went down the hall to the guest room. Neither of us said a word about it. I need to tell you something about who I am before I go further, because this story makes no sense without it. My name is Catherine. I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I was the person who kept our family financially intact. Not Richard. Richard was the one with the business card and the firm handshakes and the LinkedIn profile. But I was the one who built what he was standing on. We met when I was 32, working as a contract attorney specializing in asset protection. Richard had a small insurance company had inherited from his father, bleeding money from every direction. He didn't need a wife. He needed a CFO and a legal department and someone who understood what a balance sheet was actually saying. I was all 3 of those things. I also, at the time, loved him very much. Over the next 2 decades, I restructured the company from the ground up. I rewrote every vendor contract. I identified and closed 3 separate fraud schemes that employees had been running for years without anyone noticing. I brought the company from a $400,000 annual deficit to a $2.3 million annual profit. I did this while raising our son Garrett, while managing our household, while being the person everyone called when something went wrong. Richard took the credit in public and thanked me in private. For a long time, I told myself that was enough. When Garrett was 26, he married Delia. She was pleasant and pretty and laughed easily, and I genuinely liked her. I helped plan the wedding. I wrote them a check for the down payment on their first home. I thought we were building something together, the 4 of us. I was wrong about a great many things. The morning after I came home from Portland, Richard came downstairs and sat across from me at the breakfast table. He had the look of a man who had been rehearsing something. He said he needed to tell me something. He said he had not meant for it to happen. He said that he and Delia had developed feelings for each other over the past year, while I had been increasingly absent, increasingly focused on the company restructuring, increasingly unavailable. He said the word unavailable like it explained everything. I asked him how long. He said 14 months. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I asked him where Garrett was in all of this. Richard said Garrett had known for 3 months. That Garrett thought it would be better for everyone if they just waited until I came home to talk about it. I want you to understand what that means. My son had known for 3 months that his wife was involved with his father, and he had decided that the best thing to do was wait, not to tell me, not to confront his father. To wait and let me find out the way I did, standing in my own hallway with a suitcase in my hand and dirt from my sister's grave still on my shoes. Richard told me he wanted a divorce. He told me he and Delia planned to move forward together. He said he hoped we could handle it with dignity. He said the word dignity with a straight face. I finished my coffee. I rinsed my cup. I said I needed a few days to think. He looked almost relieved, like he had expected screaming and got silence instead, and mistook the silence for acceptance. It was not acceptance. There are two kinds of people in a crisis. There are people who react, and there are people who respond. I spent 31 years as a contract attorney and a financial architect. I do not react, I respond. And a response requires information, and information requires time, and time requires that the other side believe they are still in control. So I gave Richard the next 11 days. I was present but quiet. I was civil at dinner. I did not move out of the bedroom, but I did begin sleeping in the sitting room adjacent to it, which I explained as insomnia. I watched his behavior. I noted what he accessed on the shared home computer when he thought I was in the garden. I paid attention to what documents were still in the filing cabinet and which ones had recently been removed. What I found did not surprise me, but it confirmed everything I had suspected. Richard had met twice with a divorce attorney before telling me about the affair. He had also met with our company's accountant, a man named Phil who had always been more loyal to Richard's name on the door than to the actual operation of the business. Together, they had begun the process of reclassifying certain assets. The company's primary real estate holdings, 3 commercial properties that I had negotiated the purchase of and that I had personally restructured the mortgage agreements on, had been quietly shifted into a separate LLC 3 months ago. An LLC registered in Richard's name only. He was planning to walk away with the company. The company I had spent 20 years rebuilding from a failing inheritance into something actually worth having. What Richard had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, was that I wrote the original operating agreement for that company. I wrote it in year 4 of our marriage, when I already understood enough about who Richard was to know that I needed to protect myself. I had included what I privately called a continuity clause. It was buried in Section 9, in language that looked purely administrative. The kind of paragraph that makes eyes glaze over and hands reach for a pen without reading carefully. That clause stated that in the event of any restructuring, transfer, or reclassification of core company assets, the consent of both founding partners, defined by operational contribution rather than name on the paperwork, was required for the transfer to be legally valid. Operational contribution was defined in an attached schedule, also drafted by me, that documented my specific roles in the company over a 20-year period. The LLC Richard had created was invalid. Every asset he had moved into it was still legally contested. And because he had done it without my knowledge or consent in the context of a marriage heading toward dissolution, it crossed from aggressive asset protection into something that a judge would likely view considerably less favorably. I knew this. Richard did not know that I knew this. On the 12th day, I called my attorney. Not our family attorney who had handled our wills and the occasional contract dispute and who had known Richard since 1987. I called Margaret, a woman I had worked alongside 20 years ago, who now ran one of the most respected matrimonial and asset litigation practices in the state. I had referred 3 clients to her over the years. She took my call on the second ring. I told her everything. I sent her the operating agreement, the attached schedule, the LLC registration documents I had photographed, and a summary of the asset reclassifications I had pieced together. I told her about the 14-month affair with my daughter-in-law. I told her about my son's 3 months of knowing. Margaret was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Catherine, you built this case yourself before you even knew you were going to need it." I told her I was a contract attorney. I told her I always read what I sign. We filed within the week. The morning the papers were served, I was not home. I had arranged to be at my friend Roberta's house, ostensibly for coffee. Roberta knew nothing about what was happening. I simply needed to be somewhere else, somewhere with a witness who could confirm my state of mind, somewhere I could sit quietly while the world I had been holding together for 31 years began its controlled demolition. Richard called my cell phone 4 times in the first hour. I did not answer. Garrett called twice. I did not answer. Delia, I noticed, did not call at all, which told me something about her assessment of the situation that I found useful to note. When I came home that evening, Richard was sitting in the living room. The papers were on the coffee table. He looked like a man who had opened what he thought was a routine piece of mail and found something that rearranged his entire understanding of where he stood. He asked me if I knew about the operating agreement clause. I said yes. He asked me how long I had known he was moving the assets. I said 11 days. He asked me why I hadn't said anything. I told him that I had learned, over a long career in contract law, that the most important information is almost always held by the person who says the least. He asked me if we could talk about this. Work something out. Settle it between ourselves without dragging everything through the courts. I told him he was welcome to speak with my attorney. What followed over the next 4 months is the kind of thing that legal proceedings are designed to handle, and that I will not dramatize here because it is not the part of this story that matters most. What matters is this: the LLC was dissolved. The asset reclassifications were reversed. Richard's attorney made 2 attempts at alternative settlement arrangements, both of which my attorney rejected with what I was told was calm efficiency. The company was valued, and my 20-year operational contribution was documented in a way that a mediator ultimately found compelling. I received a settlement that included my share of the company, valued at the figure I had built it to, and not the diminished figure Richard's team had attempted to establish. I received the house, which I had also purchased originally with money from my own practice. I received a clean exit. Richard and Delia moved into a rental property. Garrett, I was told, had moved back in with his father for a period, which I found both unsurprising and clarifying. I want to tell you about Garrett because he is the part of this that I have thought about the longest. He is my son. I carried him and raised him and drove him to every school event and stayed up until 2 in the morning helping him through coursework he struggled with and loved him with. The specific and particular love that a mother has for a child, which is not like any other kind of love. That is not nothing. That will never be nothing. But Garrett made a choice when he found out what his father and his wife were doing. He made the choice to protect their arrangement instead of telling me. He made the choice to let me walk into my own house and discover it the way I did. He made the choice in the weeks that followed to continue seeing both his father and Delia socially as though nothing had happened, while I was sitting across town with an attorney, trying to hold myself together long enough to protect what I had spent my life building. Those were his choices, not mine. He called me 7 weeks after the filing. He said he wanted to explain. He said it had been an impossible position. He said he hadn't known what the right thing to do was. He said he hoped I understood. I told him I understood perfectly. I told him that understanding something and accepting it are 2 different things, and that I was not yet in a position to accept it. I told him I loved him and that I needed time. He said he hoped we could get past it. I said I hoped so too. I said it honestly because I did. But hoping something and rushing toward it before you are ready are different things. I had spent 31 years rushing toward things before I was ready in order to keep everyone else comfortable. I was not going to do that anymore. That was 18 months ago. Today, I live in a house I chose entirely for myself for the first time in my adult life. It is smaller than the house I left and quieter, and it has a study with a window that looks out over a garden that I have been learning, slowly, to tend. I took on 2 consulting clients in the first 6 months, both of them small businesses that needed the kind of structural financial work I spent 2 decades doing for Richard's company. It turns out there is a great deal of demand for someone who can read a contract the way other people read a map. I am not going to tell you that I am completely healed because I think that word asks for something I am not sure is available at 63 after the things that happened. What I will tell you is that I am clear. I know what I am. I know what I built. I know what I will not allow to be taken from me again. There was a morning, about 4 months after the settlement, when I was sitting in my new study with coffee, and the sun was coming through the garden window, and everything was very quiet. And I had a thought I want to share with you because I think it is the truest thing I have come to understand through all of this. The most dangerous assumption a person can make is that a quiet woman is a passive one. Richard made that assumption for 31 years. He mistook my steadiness for compliance. He mistook my silence for forgiveness in advance. He mistook my love of order and structure for an inability to act. He had been living for decades in a house built by someone he had fundamentally misread. That was his mistake. And unlike so many mistakes, this one had a cost that was proportional. I do not celebrate what happened. I am not the kind of person who celebrates the collapse of something I spent my life building. But I am also not the kind of person who pretends that something was not dismantled, or that I did not have to be the one to do the dismantling, or that I did not do it well. I did it well. I am still here, and for the first time in 31 years, every decision about what comes next belongs entirely to me.